Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. Have you ever been in a situation that has just gotten out of control? Maybe it's a coworker who doesn't care about their job anymore and you keep having to pick up the slack. Or maybe it's a relationship with a friend or family member that is just growing more and more distant. Sometimes it's hard to see these things happening early in the process, but if you can recognize that problem early, it's best to nip it in the bud.
Okay. I don't know why I've never looked up this phrase, but I've always imagined multiple options for why it exists.
It is probably the one that you think of immediately.
Okay.
So we'll get there here. So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, to nip something in the bud means, quote, to suppress, check, or destroy, especially at an early stage, end quote. So nip has been in use in English since the 1300s, meaning to pinch or to squeeze sharply. So this is the sense of nip that we are using. And nip has been used in various senses related to removal by pinching since the mid-1400s. So in the early 1300s, it meant to pinch something or to squeeze sharply, right? And then we started seeing it being used in a variety of senses, some figurative as well, by the early to mid-1400s. And nip seemed to arrive in gardening by the mid-1500s, meaning to check the growth of a plant by physical removal of the bud. This is where that phrase jumps from. And obviously that's not the, we can go further back to the 1300s where we're seeing nip, but our phrase is a direct piece from the botanical side of things, from the mid 1500s, meaning to check the growth of a plant by physical removal of the bud. And from each of these meanings, figurative uses of nip were employed within a few decades, according to the historical records. So it's no surprise, really, that we were within a decade of nip being used in gardening when we started seeing the figurative uses of nip it in the bud happening. And I will note that the Oxford English Dictionary noted the phrase was used in early works as nipped in the bloom, but they did not provide any examples of this. And the few I found were actually were not as old as the examples of nip it in the bud. So what I saw was nip it in the bud was older than nipped in the bloom. So unless the Oxford English Dictionary has some sources that they didn't include in their website, I'm not sure that the evidence supports that nipped in the bloom is first. It may have been, there was some early uses of it, and maybe that's what they mean by that. But definitely nipped in the bud were the things that I found as earlier uses than nipped in the bloom. Okay. But, so there's also could be, and the Oxford English Dictionary is good about this, looking at sources that are outside of English, but that's not a skill set that you or I have. So It is also possible that nipped in the bloom may have been a gardening term in other languages, but it didn't provide what that would have been. So if that's the case, then I don't know. But we know that we do have nipped for gardening being happening in the mid-1500s, and the first time I could find our phrase nipped in the bud in print was in a work called An Herbal for the Bible, containing a plain and familiar exposition of such similitudes, parables, and metaphors, both in the Old Testament and the New, are borrowed and taken from herbs, plants, trees, fruits, and simples, by observation of their virtues, qualities, natures, properties, observations, and effects, and by the holy prophets, sacred writers, Christ himself, and his blessed apostles, usually alleged and into their heavenly oracles, for the better beautifying and plainer opening of the same, profitably inserted.
Wow.
So this was drawn into English by Thomas Newton in 1587. So within just a few short decades of the phrase being seen, or with nipped being used To refer to removing something to check a growth in gardening, we start seeing nipped in the bud being used metaphorically.
Okay. The title is ridiculous,
It
but
is, yes.
we know what it's about.
That's true. You have no questions as to what it's about. They hadn't created synopses yet, so they just put the whole synopsis in the title. That way, it's
Right.
just easier to know. Okay, so this passage is speaking about those who are raised improperly and noting the Lord would pluck them up and weed them out before they come to full ripeness. Okay, here's the quote. By which words he signifieth and meaneth, that although they practice never so many slights, policies, devices, deceits, frauds, quarrels, massacres, murders, spoils, and desolations, yet shall they come short of their desire, and not be able to bring to pass their conceived mischiefs, but shall be nipped as it were in the bud, before they can attain to any ripeness or strength to work their malice. End quote.
Okay.
And they didn't know they shall be nipped, as it were, in the bud, indicating a way that we're using this figuratively. Or are they? I don't know. But yeah, so they were using the figurative terminology for that, right? You're not actually nipping a flower, right?
Right.
You're nipping the person, I guess. We see another example in a book of sermons by Lancelot Andrews and John Buckeridge. Lancelot, why don't we have Lancelots anymore?
Right. And it's not like this guy had a name that Andrews. It's just Andrews. Lancelot
Right.
Andrews. You could put Lancelot with anything.
Yeah. I mean, are people, hang on, now I have to know, maybe I'm the idiot.
I bet
Are
they
people
are.
named Lance? Is their full name Lancelot?
I bet some of them are. I mean, I'm certain that not all of them are, but I bet some of
Right.
them are for sure.
Okay. So this book is the second edition. It was published in 1631. However, the sermon with our phrase, sermon number 8, was delivered before the King's Majesty at Whitehall on November 5th, 1616. Here's the relevant passage. Quote, "But yes, why was it suffered to come so far? Why not taken sooner? Evil, we all know, is best nipped in the bud, best ever destroyed in the spawn." End quote.
Oh,
So in this case, they weren't actually talking about killing babies or anything
right.
here. They were talking about if someone has bad influences on them, right? You should stop those influences as soon as you recognize it. Next up is a play called The Miser, a comedy, and it was written by Thomas Shadwell in 1672. Here's a line from it. Quote, "I pox on it, thou art not compos mentis, thou art in love. But here's a couple of remedies for that disease, which, if thou dost not nip in the bud, will prove more dangerous than the 3 claps." End quote. So the 3 claps in this case not being the way that we may think of the clap these days, which would be a sexually transmitted illness
Right.
or infection. This would be the 3 claps mean thieves' slang for going to prison. A new Canteen dictionary, comprehending all of the terms, ancient and modern, used in the several tribes of gypsies, beggars, shoplifters, highwaymen, footpads, and all other clans of cheats and villains. This is the name of that book, not my words. And this is dated 1725. And in this, a new Canteen dictionary, here is the entry for nip. Quote, "Nip, a cheat, also to pinch or sharp anything. Nip a bung, to cut a purse. To nip, to press between the fingers and the thumb without the nails, or with any broad instrument like a pair of tongs, as to squeeze between edged instruments of the pincers. Nipping frost or wind, sharp or cutting. To nip in the bud, to crush anything at the beginning." End quote.
Okay.
So you see a variety of ways that nip is used in that particular piece. So you could just say that nip would just be a cheat or a thief potentially, because if you were nipping a bung, you were cutting open a purse and letting the coins fall out of it, right? So yeah, you've got, and nip, to nip in the bud, which in this case they're saying means to crush anything at the beginning, but it's using the literal definition of nip as well here with pressing a finger or pressing something between the fingers and thumbs, to be able to pinch it basically.
Right. So I find that interesting because you've got like pinch or nip, like as being associated with thievery.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's still, I mean, like kind of similar terms are
Yeah.
used, for that. So that's
It is, yeah.
yeah.
It's definitely more common now to hear something like that. I wouldn't say, and when I say more common, I don't mean you hear it more frequently. I mean you'll hear it among a wider array of people than
Hmm.
before, when you would have only heard it among those using that language and those who lived in the scene.
Right. A little bit more widely spread than it
Yes.
was
Yeah.
previously.
Okay, next one is the Daily Universal Register, and this is out of London, England, and it was dated October 24th, 1786. Quote, as prevention is in all cases better than punishment, so too nip the bud of vice in its earliest stage is founder policy, than to let the fruit ripen to maturity. End quote. So, yet another use of this figurative, saying we've got to deal with the issues of vice early in the process, because if you let it ripen to maturity, it will be harder to get rid of.
Right.
Old habits die hard. Here's one talking about the War of 1812, which actually ended in 1815. This is from a piece talking about the U.S. Navy and how they kept defeating the British Navy. And this was out of the Rhode Island Republic, USA, dated January 10th, 1816. Quote, they were taken from an enemy who viewed our little navy with an eye of jealousy, who wished to annihilate it and nip it in the bud. End quote. I always find the War of 1812 to be a fascinating subject. It was kind of the last of the Anglo-American wars, that started, in the 1770s between the United States and the UK, who are good allies now. But yeah, so that the War of 1812 was a fascinating piece, and we're going to look a little more into it in our behind-the-scenes video, which airs every Friday on our Patreon. That is patreon.com/BonnieTrailsPod. Here's one from the Soldier's Journal out of Virginia, USA, and it's dated October 12th, 1864, and it talks of Sir Boyle Roberts's frustrations with an anonymous writer named Junius, who kept harassing Roberts for his many blunders. About it, Roberts had to say this, quote, sir, he said, addressing the Speaker of the Irish House, I smell a rat. I saw him floating in the air, but, mark me, I shall yet nip him in the bud. End quote. I have no idea what mixed up metaphors he was using there, but suffice it to say, he wanted Junius stopped. That was his goal, and he wanted to end this. Although I don't think nipping him in the bud was going to be working, because it had been going on for a bit at this
Right.
point.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, what does that mean?
Right, but I saw him floating in the air. I'm not familiar with that one either. Again, as I like to remind everyone, just because I haven't heard of it doesn't mean anything. I haven't heard most things on the planet, so it would be wild to make a claim that just because I haven't heard of it doesn't mean it's a thing.
It
But
doesn't exist.
right, yeah. Well, I haven't heard of it, and therefore it can't happen. All right, so next up, here's an interesting take for the time. This was found in the Daybook out of Illinois, USA, and it was dated November 9th, 1916. It's from an article called Study of the Nude Female Form by Youth in Art Classes Would Stop Immorality. Now, the person making this claim is a professional model, one Miss Ruth Reynolds, and here is part of what she had to say. Quote, there is no valid reason why young men and women should grow up with this consuming covert speculation regarding the opposite sex. Wholesome educational influences, such as private and public art schools maintain, would nip pruriency in the bud. The best way to allay curiosity is to frankly permit its satisfaction under supervision. End quote. So she was arguing that against the claims that having paintings with nude people on it and using nude models for those paintings, the folks at the time were saying that this was inappropriate and immoral, and she was saying on the contrary, there's nothing immoral about this. You're prudes. So instead, why don't they're part of the problem is that there's so much curiosity about it because we created a taboo subject around it. But there's nothing. This can be in a safe environment where they can look at the human body and not have it be sexual, but have it be artistic, and to focus on
Right.
painting the artistic components of it, right?
Yeah.
The next one is out of the Evening Star, Washington, D.C., USA, and is dated November 9th, 1941. This is from an article called Beauty in the Bud by Sylvia Byth, and it's all about what mothers should do to ensure the babies grow up to be beautiful. I will not read any of the advice because it was
Okay.
all awful,
Okay.
but I will include this line, which has our phrase, quote, I made a roundup of babies' problems and took them to a child growth clinic, which helps a mother to nip troubles in the bud and keep an eye on the young miss and mister until they skip off to school, end quote.
It's a miracle some generations survived.
Yeah, it speaks to the veracity and resilience of humans in general,
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
Right.
Well, with that, it's time to move to our more modern uses. But before we do that, we need to say thank you to our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls, and Fridays are our lightly edited behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by Shauna, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
All right, we're going to start our modern uses with a 1958 Japanese book, the English title of which is Nip the Buds, Shoot the Kids. It was written by Kenzaburi Oe, and the English version was translated by Maki Sugiyama. The English language version was released in 1995, the year after Kenzaburi Oe was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Here is the synopsis for the book from Goodreads. Quote, Nip the Buds, Shoot the Kids recounts the exploits of 15 teenage reformatory boys evacuated in wartime to a remote mountain village where they are feared and detested by the local peasants. When plague breaks out, the villagers flee, blocking the boys inside the deserted town. Their brief attempt to build autonomous lives of self-respect, love, and tribal valor is doomed in the face of death and the adult nightmare of war. End quote. In his Nobel acceptance speech, he commented how he was a boy at the end of World War I and lived in a remote wooded area on an island that was part of the Japanese archipelago. And that experience is what informed a lot of this book, the setting of this book.
Wow.
Yeah, and you can watch his Nobel acceptance speech. We'll link to it on the YouTube, so you can jump onto our show notes or onto our Patreon and watch that on YouTube and listen to him talk about this and many other things during that acceptance speech. Next up, we're going to Mayberry, USA. The Andy Griffith Show aired for 8 years, starting in 1960. It featured the implacable sheriff, Andy, and his bumbling sidekick, Barney Fife. Barney was fond of the phrase, nip it in the bud, and it became a running gag on the show. A quick search of YouTube will find you tons of clips of Barney saying this classic line, so much though that you can see a noticeable rise in the use of the phrase through Google's Ngram throughout the 1960s. I'm not saying Barney Fife is the only reason for this, but the Andy Griffith Show never fell below 7th in the ratings, and like I Love Lucy and Seinfeld, it ended its run in the number 1 spot. And the Ngram does show a drop in the phrase after the show ended its original run. But I will remind myself and everyone else correlation does not equal causation. So, who knows?
Very entertaining in a very cheesy, wholesome way.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Moving onward, Nip It in the Bud by the B-52s is a song off of their 1982 album, Mesopotamia. The song ends with this bit, quote, "Nip it in the bud, whoa, whoa, whoa. Give it a shove. Hey, you gotta head 'em up, move 'em out, hooah. Ah, come take me away. Say, come take me away. Nip it in the bud." End quote.
I
Some,
could like hear it, you know.
yeah, sometimes I struggle to understand what the B-52s are talking about in their songs because I'm like,
Always.
it's definitely they're definitely not talking about a rock lobster, right? This is a metaphor for something, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like this was also a metaphor for something that I just wasn't old enough when I first heard this song to understand, and now the song is in my head as it is instead.
Amazing.
Yeah. Your kid's a brat, and it's all your fault. Nip the attitude in the bud, from toddler to tween, is a book by Ellen Rose Glickman, 2016 self-help book for parents. Here is the synopsis from the publisher. Quote, "You've seen them, kids running wild through the restaurants while the parents avert their gaze and order another cappuccino. You've heard them, kids telling their parents to shut up and get me that. You've met them, kids who dress inappropriately and roll their eyes and never say thank you. Maybe one of those kids belongs to you. Combining incisive commentary with grounded, practical advice, Your Kid's a Brat and It's All Your Fault will have you recognizing and laughing at yourself, your fellow parents, and a culture that seems determined to turn our precious angels into not-so-precious brats. Divided into 3 sections, Your Budding Brat for toddlers and preschoolers, Your Bratty Child for grade schoolers, and Your Bratty Tween. This book is packed with wisdom and tips culled from the trenches of child rearing. Your Kid's a Brat and It's All Your Fault will not only help you grow adept at responding to specific misbehaviors, but also will encourage and empower you to become the confident, respected parent you yearn to be." End quote.
Amazing.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I have such a weird thing with this because, you see kids running through whatever and, a restaurant or whatever, and nobody's doing anything about it. And I just have to be like, I don't know why this bothers me. This probably shouldn't bother me. But then there's other things when like kids roll their eyes or whatever. I'm like, that's never bothered me. And maybe it's because I did it when I was a kid, and it's not. I know I never did it as a sign of disrespect as much as it was just I didn't have a poker face and I hadn't learned how to not let my emotions be on my face, something that you still don't understand. But at least I have a better poker face than you, and this is why
I'm
whenever we play
terrible at
poker,
it.
Shauna loses.
I'm horrible at the keeping my face straight, and I like. Yeah, so I just avoid anything that would require me to be on camera, except for this apparently. But you guys
Yeah.
get to see all of it. No, but seriously, in interactions and things, I mean, I feel for kids because sometimes, adults say things that don't make sense to them, and then they make a face about it because they're like, "What?"
Right. Right.
It's like they're not trying to be. Generally, it's
Mm-hmm.
not an act of disrespect. Like it's not this intentional, something against the adult. It's they're
They're trying to process whatever's going on, yeah, and they don't
they're
understand.
in their head,
And they don't know how to say they don't understand.
right. So instead, they make a face that looks like to others rude.
Right.
I guess. Yeah.
Well, and I can definitely say that as a parent, there have been times when my patience was thinner than my desire to explain something to my child, which probably shouldn't be the case, but it is the case a lot.
Yeah.
So I get it. But yes.
It's like I mean, I'm gonna keep saying that's like pretty much the toughest job on the planet is trying to be a parent. You're trying to build a whole human into a decent person is like
Agreed.
There's a lot of responsibility.
Nipped in the Bud by Sheila Connolly is a 2018 book. Here's the synopsis from the publisher. Quote, "Winter still has a firm stranglehold on the small town of Granford, and newly married orchard owner Meg Chapin is restless to begin her spring pruning and planting, while Seth busies himself with a new project of his own. But their relative peace is shattered when a gunshot breaks the winter silence and they discover the body of a dead woman on their land. What's just as troubling is that the state police have hushed up the murder and are warning Meg not to investigate. Never one to sit by idly with a killer on the loose, Meg starts digging for clues and probing for answers as discreetly as she can. When the victim turns out to have been an undercover reporter doing a story on the blossoming trade in illegal drugs in the area, Meg's stunned to learn that this very modern crime has come to sleepy Granford. Unwilling to accept that the nasty business has put down roots so close to home and led to a murder that occurred literally in her own backyard, Meg is determined to nip it in the bud before the town she knows and loves turns rotten. End quote.
I like all the references to plants and stuff in there. It's very good.
It is very good.
Yeah.
And I do appreciate the line, never one to sit by idly with a killer on the loose. And I'm like, wait, never. That implies this has happened more than once. This implies that this has happened on more than one occasion, and she just doesn't sit idly. Listen, when there's a killer on the loose, I'm not one to sit by idly. One last one here. Nip in the Bud is a charitable incorporated organization registered in England and Wales that focuses on children's mental health. Here's more information from their About Us page. Quote, Nip in the Bud was set up to encourage awareness about mental health disorders in children. These relatively common problems, which begin in childhood and adolescence, can have wide-ranging and long-lasting effects, affecting a child's relationships, their educational attainment, and job opportunities. If left untreated, they could also develop into serious mental and physical health problems and have significant economic and social cost, not just to the individuals and their families, but later in life to the health and criminal justice system as well. With early interventions, things can be very different, end quote. And they've even got a few podcast episodes they produced, which you can find on their website, nipinthebud.org. Well, I'm a big fan of the concept of nipping something in the bud. I like to tackle issues early and often to avoid them spiraling out of control. Sometimes I use the wound analogy, saying a wound will fester if it's not cleaned and dealt with early on, but that conjures apparently too gross an imagery for most people. So I will instead have to use the gardening imagery, and I will say it's important to weed the garden and to nip unwanted guests in the bud before they become a problem. And the gardening metaphor is generally much better received, but regardless of the metaphor I use, dealing with something early in the process to prevent it becoming a bigger issue is solid advice. So, as Barney Fife would say, nip it in the bud. That's about all we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It is poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, what is your favorite summer relaxation method? The winner by a few feet was being anywhere with AC. And with rising temps across the globe, I suppose that's a completely fair answer. Other vote getters were sitting outside reading, chatting with friends, or doing nothing. Always valid. As well as grilling in the yard and napping in the hammock. JGP said, quote, for me, it depends on the temperature. If it's anywhere near the mid-90s or hotter, mid-30s Celsius, I'll stick to places with good AC, thank you very much. I don't care if it's a dry heat or not. Summers where I've been lately have just been too dang hot.
Well said. Well said, JGP. I don't care if it's a dry heat or not.
I know.
I don't want to hear any about that.
Whenever people say that, I'm always like, I don't even know what that means.
It's a dry
anymore.
heat. So is my oven.
Like, I don't know. Are we comparing it to Florida or where? Like which?
That's a soupy heat.
Right. Mary added, quote, like JGP, for me, it depends on the weather and especially the temperature. I love to be outside, but not to tan. I gave that up as a youth when science said to stop it. I love reading a book outside, but when it's hot, give me AC and a comfy chair where I can also see outside every time. End quote.
Yeah, Heather said, quote, as much as I do love AC, there's something about a hammock that makes me instantly relaxed and able to turn my brain off, end quote. And Dustin added, quote, I burn on beaches, but get me outside with some tunes or a book and I can be blessed out. Even better with a podcast like this one, end quote. Oh, Dustin, thanks, man. I actually fall asleep most nights to Dustin's amazing podcast, Sandman Stories Presents. We've mentioned it loads of times on the show, but I still highly recommend it. But on the topic of summer relaxation, I love almost every option. Hammocks are great once you get into them. That sometimes can be the problem, but I may have to reach out to Heather for her tips. Stargazing can be tons of fun in a hammock or just laying, in or on a sleeping bag. I do love the beach. I love cooking outside, so grilling is great, though it's really just an excuse to do my number one plan when it is sunny and warm, setting outside. I tan very easily, regardless of how much sunscreen I have slathered on, and I very rarely burn. But I will try and find a slightly shady spot so I'm not sitting directly in the sun because, as Mary said, science is very clear about that. But I can be reading, I can be talking with friends in person. I'm not a phone guy. I can be grilling, or I can just be sitting there with my coffee or my water or occasionally a different cold beverage and enjoying the outside.
Yeah. I think that it's not so much the getting into the hammock; it's the not being immediately ejected from the hammock that a lot of people struggle.
Sure. That's very similar to it's not the tripping and falling that's problematic. It's once you've hit the ground.
Right. Yeah. My favorite summer relaxation method is floating somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. But if that's not an option, I'm not really stuck on one thing. Camping or laying under the stars, that's all awesome. I also enjoy most of the typical relaxing things like reading, listening to music, sitting in silence, aside from the cicadas in my garden, or whatever feels right at the moment, but generally in the shade or after the sun goes down.
Right, because you're allergic to the sun.
Yeah. Literally, unfortunately. I'm not a vampire.
No, she's definitely a vampire, everybody.
Whatever. As a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid, and patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
Words belong to their users.